Welcome, everyone, to Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We're your hosts and co-founders of fantasyforesight.com, coming to you from the Rambo Fixture Company studios. I'm Ben.
And I'm Jay.
You ready to get rolling, Jay?
You know it. Let's do this.
All right, let's go. Welcome in, everyone. It is Wednesday, August 5th. We've got our guy Steve at FF_encyclopedia back with us. We've got the preview of the quarterbacks and running backs of the NFC West. And once again, Fantasy Foresight, the podcast, is live. How you doing tonight, Jay?
Ben, you know I'm doing great. We have an interesting episode to get to tonight. Some of the players may not have the most exciting names, but that usually leads us to some very interesting conversations. So I'm dying to dig in. Steve, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic, guys, like always. And Jay, we were talking about it just a little bit before we got on. It's nice being down in the basement where it's quiet, away from the kiddos. Got to give a quick shout out to my wife. Thank you for holding down the fort so I can come down and do this with my guys. And I do want to, quick little shameless plug here, but I do come on these shows and I talk a little bit about, some red zone, goal line numbers, play calling tendencies out of these teams. And if you want to follow along as far as that's concerned with these players from the NFC West, definitely go out to fantasyforesight.com and check out the Foresight Encyclopedia tab. I have all that broken out there for you if you want to check that out.
Perfect. All right. Before we dive in, if this is your first time listening, just know that we are speaking in terms of single QB formats and full PPR redraft by default. All of our ADP data comes from fantasyfootballcalculator.com according to 12-team PPR settings, and all of our 2019 fantasy stats and 2018, 2017, those are all full PPR weeks 1 through 16 according to fantasypros.com. And without that out of the way, let's get right to it. We are going to go in order of ADP, highest to lowest, starting with the running backs, ending with the quarterbacks. And very first up, surprise, surprise, we've got the Arizona Cardinals running back, Kenyon Drake, going as the RB9 to kick off the division at the 111. Get this. This is unrelated, but it was probably the most shocking thing I saw all week. Zeke has dropped to RB7 in ADP in full PPR settings. What are we doing? This is dumb. Anyways, Zeke RB7, Joe Mixon RB8, Kenyon Drake RB9. Going right behind him is Nick Chubb and Miles Sanders. The running backs for the Cardinals have the 15th ranked strength of schedule this season, and their offensive line comes in ranked 21st. The aggregate projection for Kenyon Drake this year is RB9. Total Foresight has a little bit of pause, a little bit of cause for concern, having him come in at RB20. Little bit of sample size issues is probably to explain for that. When you look at his last 3 seasons, as far as where he finished in fantasy points per game, in 2017, he was RB44. In 2018, he improved that to RB21. And in 2019, he improved that to RB13 in fantasy points per game. He missed 2 games on the year last year, still ended up with 158 carries for 757 yards at a 4.8 yard per carry average with 7 rushing touchdowns. He also hauled in 47 catches on 64 targets for 322 receiving yards at an average of almost 7 yards per reception. He ended up as RB16 overall. He was 20th in consistency, 9th in consistency as a starter from week 9 on, and he was 8th in Foresight consistency that measures a player's improvement or lack thereof throughout the year. He was also 9th in rushing touchdowns, 13th in running back receptions, 11th in running back targets, and 17th in running back receiving yards. Per next-gen stats, he was the 17th most efficient north-south runner last year. And according to playerprofiler.com, he was just 25th in red zone touches, and I got to think that'll improve in 2020. He was 14th in true yards per carry, 13th in dominator rating. And other than the fact that he's never been the guy for a full season, what's not to love about his talent and his exclusive role in this specific offense? These are the running backs that I take ahead of Kenyon Drake in full PPR formats this season. CMC, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, and Zeke Elliott. End of list. Derrick Henry has no passing upside and a ton of recent mileage. CEH, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he has a huge question mark even in that Kansas City offense. Dalvin will likely miss some time, and I like Arizona's overall rushing outlook more than Mixon's in Cincinnati. It all comes down to the situation that Drake has proved to be effective in by averaging over 100 total yards per game in 8 starts with Arizona last season. I am all in on him in 2020.
Yeah, man. When we talked about Kenyon Drake a little earlier in this offseason, you guys both know I was pretty in love with the guy, and not much has really changed in regards to that. I will say Arizona, they were, when I looked at how fast of a tempoed offense they were, because you guys remember heading into last season, it was like, we're going to run 70 plays a game and be one of the top paced offenses in the league. They ended up clocking in 21st in the NFL, so obviously a little lower than you would have liked, but they did so much to address their defense, which I think, if you can't keep the other team off the field, you can't really run as many plays. So I do think that we will see that number rise, and that will directly correlate to more opportunity, not just in the red zone, but all over the place for the entire Arizona offense. So I give you all that to lead into the fact that Kenyon Drake had 22 red zone carries last season. Now, I honestly can't say I could find a way to get exactly how many of those were in Miami and in Arizona. But what I can say is all 7 of his touchdowns in the red zone all came with the Arizona Cardinals, which if you look at that efficiency, 22 carries, 7 red zone touchdowns off of that's insane. And to push that a little bit further, 6 goal line attempts, punched in 5 of those. So you just have to really like that. And that's coming from an offense that was a little slower paced last season. So, it's hard to argue with a single point that you made, Ben. And you're right. I think the only question we have with Drake at this point in time is, can he handle the load as the guy? And that, to me, is the only thing that could possibly hold him back from being an absolute fantasy superstar this season.
Well, and I can tell you guys that, I wasn't necessarily against Kenyon Drake heading into this postseason. I was more of on the fence, and you guys have gradually talked me into him. What I can say is that, despite being a darling of the second half of last season and seeing David Johnson really take a backseat to Kenyon Drake in that offense. And Steve, you spoke to his efficiency, and seeing what he did scoring-wise was just incredible. But heading into 2020, he is the one player on this offense that I trust the most. There's question mark for me at quarterback. There's question marks at really how productive the receivers can be compared to their price tag. But the one standalone that I feel like I can trust the most is Kenyon Drake. And there's a lot of national attention going to this offense and a lot of increased expectation. So if I'm going to put my money anywhere on this offense, it's going to be in Kenyon Drake.
And hey, I do just want to throw in real quick also, guys, like he had 35 targets and 26 receptions too. So, full PPR. It's just another thing. It's just another thing to like about his game. He definitely has soft hands. Is a great pass catcher out in the backfield.
And by the way, Steve, if I am putting money on Kenyon Drake this season, I am going to bank on him doubling his red zone efficiency from last season, since he's going to have a full year in Arizona. So 14 red zone scores, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
right.
Perfect. All right, sweet. All right, moving on to the second drafted the second drafted running back in this division is Chris Carson, interestingly enough, from the Seattle Seahawks. We have now dropped back to RB19 going in the latter stages of the 3rd round. He is being drafted behind Leonard Fournette, behind David Johnson, who I just mentioned, and in front of Le'Veon Bell and Melvin Gordon. Right now, the strength of schedule rank for the running backs in Seattle is 25th out of 32 teams. Their offensive line is ranked 28th out of 32 teams. Not the best combination for the running backs in Seattle. Now, his aggregate projection is RB14, and his price tag, as I mentioned, was RB19. Total Foresight actually likes him to be a tick better at RB11, so a back-end RB1. Let's take a look at his results from the past few seasons. In 2017, he was RB 35 in points per game. In 2018, he was RB 18 in points per game. And then last season, he finished as RB 12 in points per game, just about where Total Foresight likes him to be this season. Some notable stats from last season, and he has got a gamut of interesting statistics. He finished as RB 10 overall and RB 12 in points per game. He was 11th in consistency and 12th in consistency from weeks 10 to 16. You talk about consistency, he was pretty consistent between the entire season and when it mattered most. He was 15th in Foresight consistency. Now let's get into his finishes. He was 19th in top 6 percentage, 18th in RB1 percentage, and 8th in RB2 percentage. Love seeing that floor. He was fourth in the NFL in rushing attempts, and he was 5th in rushing yards. Wow, he was 2nd in runs of greater than 20 yards. That is eye-opening. I had no idea. And he was 9th in rushing touchdowns. On top of that, he was still 21st in receptions, 22nd in targets, 26th in receiving yards, and 14th in receiving touchdowns. So he did give you a little bit of PPR contribution in addition to all that running production. Now, according to Player Profiler, Seattle was 3rd in run plays per game, so that obviously helped the production side. He was 11th in weighted opportunities, 13th in red zone touches, which Steve will get to here momentarily, 10th in total yards, 3rd in breakaway runs, 6th in evaded tackles, 15th in juke rate, 4th in yards created, and 14th in goal line carries. So where does all that lead us? Man, his 2019 was impressive, but in 2020, almost none of it matters because he fractured his hip in week 16. And unfortunately, Player Profiler has him as the 6th most likely to get injured and the 12th most fragile player. God, I wouldn't want that title. Jeez. Ouch. I hate to say it, but I think I'm staying away from Chris Carson this season. While he's expected to be healthy week 1, and he's known to be the starter, as Carlos Hyde noted on June 8th per rotoworld.com, a week 16 hip fracture just sounds awfully concerning. You've got Penny on the PUP list, and Carlos Hyde is going undrafted after posting a career-high 1,070 yards rushing last season.
A career high for Carlos Hyde.
It's crazy. For my money, I'm starting with Carlos Hyde for free and attempting to buy low on Chris Carson after what I expect to be a slow start. And that's if he's even ready week 1.
Man, oh man, guys, it's like the thing you love most about Chris Carson's game, that running style, is also always the thing that just puts him in danger. Right. And it stinks. But man, oh man, Jay, you alluded to some of the goal line and red zone numbers. And what I did find interesting is when you look at the Seattle offense, they ran the ball 45.7% of the time, which was 6th in the NFL. And we know that, right? That's been their MO the last few seasons, is they like to run the heck out of football. But what I did find interesting, and it does affect the running backs moving forward, and we'll talk about it in more with greater depth when we talk about Russell Wilson. When they're in the red zone as a team, they do tend to throw the ball more. But we'll get to that a little bit later because, like you said, you can almost throw out a lot of what happened last year because it's just not going to look the same here in 2020. And it's really a shame. And I couldn't agree more about, hey, I'll take Carlos Hyde for free because, guys, a 3rd-round pick for a dude coming off a serious hip injury just sounds like way too risky for a 3rd-round pick.
Especially in week 16. We're not talking about in week 2 or 3. Exactly. This just happened at the end of the season. I love Chris Carson. We were rightfully all in on Chris Carson on this podcast last season, and he proved us right. I loved having him on my team at a value price tag in our league of record all season, and I hate being off of him in 2020. But unless he is one of those guys and he comes back just freakishly, like Manny Sanders did, even older than he is from an Achilles last season. If Chris Carson surprises us all in the hip injury, doesn't impact him whatsoever, and he's the same old guy, then great. But I mean, at the 308, that's a massive gamble, and just I'm not doing it.
That's a ton of risk that you're taking on right there, that he's going to be right, he's going to be okay, and he's going to be the same player. So, yeah, man, that's a lot of risk that early in a draft.
Yeah, I hate to say it, and it bums me out, but what cheers me up is how interesting I found the research for this next guy on our list. San Francisco 49ers running back Raheem Mostert, currently going as RB26 at the 503 behind David Montgomery and Devin Singletary and in front of Kareem Hunt and DeAndre Swift. The running backs for the 49ers have the 11th ranked strength of schedule and the 8th ranked offensive line. That spells great things for their running backs. Mostert is projected a little bit behind his price tag at RB31, and with his limited sample size, Total Foresight clocks him in at RB35. Over his last 3 seasons, he has improved mightily. In 2017, he was RB146 in fantasy points per game.
I didn't know that many running backs played.
Yep, neither did I. In 2018, he finished as RB84 in fantasy points per game, and last season he improved that to RB39. He did not miss a start last year. He had 127 attempts for 715 yards at a 5.6 yards per carry average and had 6 rushing touchdowns. On top of that, he added an insane 12.6 yards per reception with 164 receiving yards on just 13 receptions, and 2 of those were touchdowns. So, I'm sorry, I said he didn't miss a start. He didn't miss a game last year. He had 0 technically starts last year, and yet he was 10th in top 6 percentage last year. He was 21st in consistency weeks 10 to 16. He was 28th in RB1 percentage, 27th in Foresight consistency. Minimum 100 attempts, he was number 1 in yards per carry. He was 14th in rushing touchdowns, 3rd in yards per reception, and 14th in receiving touchdowns. Per Next Gen Stats, he was the 6th most efficient north-south runner in the NFL. And per playerprofiler.com, San Francisco runs the 2nd most run plays per game in 2019. Bodes well for him in 2020. Raheem Mostert was number 1 in true yards per carry, 6th in breakaway runs, 1st in breakaway run rate, 17th in juke rate, 3rd in production premium, all while seeing the 7th most stacked fronts. This dude was legit. I know the playoffs don't count for fantasy, but then remember after what I just told you, he followed that up with 112 rush yards per game in 3 playoff games and tallied 5 total touchdowns at a 6.3 yards per carry clip. Mostert's 5.6 yards per carry in the regular season in 2019, minimum 100 carries, is number 1, like I said, overall. And I've heard people discount him entirely because he's 28 years old and San Francisco's the 5th team he's been on since 2015, but he has shown us signs of his breakout prior to last season. In 2018, minimum 30 carries. He was again RB1 overall with 7.7 yards per carry. And in 2017, even though he only logged 6 carries, he was still RB14 in yards per carry that year too. Even crazier than that, I looked it up on ProFootballReference.com, and in the entire history of the NFL, no one with 175 plus career rushing attempts has a better yards per carry average than Raheem Mostert.
What?
At RB, yeah. I mean, it's a small sample size relative to a career. I do not dispute that. But at RB 46, I think he has the most day one upside of this group in 2020.
And so are you sure you read that right? Because I'm pretty sure Kalen Ballage has the highest yards.
I looked it up several times because I was like, man, there's no way this is right.
It's so hard to keep a straight face that entire time, I'll tell you guys.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, so Guys, when it comes to Raheem Mostert, I'm someone that I definitely see where the value is. I don't discount him whatsoever. However, I'm not into paying too high of a price either. I love him if I can have him as like my flex running back. I don't want to rely on him as an RB2. And a lot of the reason goes back to, I even look at the red zone carries amongst the 49ers backs last year. I mean, Tevin Coleman was first with 27. Then you had Jeff Wilson Jr. with 16. Then Raheem Mostert with 14. And they were all highly efficient in the red zone as well. And that's the thing about Kyle Shanahan's offense is you kind of feel like that, and it's so successful, so you can't argue with him as far as what it means to the real life 49ers. But it's like from a fantasy perspective, you're like, man, if this guy could just get let him have 60% of it and let the other guys kind of cut it up and parse it out however it has to be. And man, and you saw it, Ben, you spoke to his playoff performance, and you saw a little bit of that in the playoffs where in their divisional game, 12 carries. Championship game, 29. Super Bowl, 12. So it's just like, if I could have him as a flex and just absorb the weeks where he's like, okay, Kyle Shanahan's like, all right, that's my guy with the hot hand. I spun the wheel. It's Mostert this week. You can absorb those huge performances. Then I think that's golden, like sitting in your flex. And I'll take that all day. So, I think if you're in a league where people aren't as hip to Mostert, he'll definitely drop. And you gobble him up, if just for me, not in the 5th round.
I'm with you guys. I mean, I really like Raheem Mostert, but in my mind, he's becoming kind of James White, where he's such a dynamic, efficient fantasy scorer and producer on the football field. But with, like you said, Steve, his usage is what worries me. You just bang the table of like, this guy, every time he touches the ball, it's lightning in a bottle. Like, why wouldn't you feed that more? And you wonder if you do feed that more, if he would be quite as efficient. But we've seen other guys who have...
Well, down the stretch, when it mattered most, that's exactly what they did, Jay.
Well, and you're right, Ben. And I was going to say, like Alvin Kamara, we wondered when he was the guy, would he be as efficient? He may not have been as crazy efficient, but he was still an efficient player. And James White, when guys around him drop like flies, he's still an incredibly efficient player. Austin Echoler, we saw what he did last season when he got more playing time. So, I'm with you, Steve. I really like him. I think he can be an incredible scorer. Heck, he could be a league winner if he's the number one option. The problem is we've seen him be number 3 behind the 2 guys that are also on that squad. Ben, I see you shaking your head. And
we saw the increased usage down the stretch. And again, in the playoffs, he was the undisputed man. In the offseason, he requested a trade and they paid him, man.
Well,
he is going to get a larger percentage of the running back carries. Him being the 6th most efficient north-south runner in the NFL, combined with that 8th ranked offensive line, Kyle Shanahan's scheme, and that 11th ranked strength of schedule. I mean, like Steve said, I prefer him in my flex. Don't get me wrong, but I don't hate it if I am loading up in the first 4 rounds and he ends up as my RB2.
Listen, we always say follow the money, but they restructured his deal. He's only making like a little over $2 million this season. I believe he's still the 3rd highest. Hang on.
Our guy Travis Sumpter is listening and commenting live about you are drinking the haterade, and I agree with him. And he is hilarious. Thank you, Travis.
Okay, first of all, Travis, listen. Steve also hates him, and
I didn't say I hate him. I just don't. I just don't know what'll happen with his usage. I think he should be the guy, or he should get a shot to be the guy.
I'm not saying they paid him a ton of money. I'm just saying a guy of his stature on the roster demanded a trade. Good things don't always happen, but he improved his contract situation after the fact, which affirms to me that they value what he did for them in the playoffs and down the stretch, and he is going to earn himself a whole lot more than 127 rush attempts.
Listen, man, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you. I hope that's the case.
You are.
My fear is that we are all sitting here in the fantasy community. Travis, if you're listening, all of us, we could all be sitting here saying he should be the number 1 guy. That doesn't mean that coaching staff is going to make him the number 1 guy. It doesn't mean he's going to get the bulk of the carries. So I just, at the end of the day, he's going in the 5th round, which with the guys going around him, that's a fine place to take him. So I'm completely okay with that. I just have a little bit of reservation about his usage. That's all. That's it.
I think David Montgomery gets the most volume of that group for sure. Kareem Hunt has some nice PPR upside and has the most upside if Nick Chubb goes down. I've already been on the record of saying I'm not excited about Devin Singletary. I don't think, he doesn't get any red zone opportunities. He has no touchdown upside. Deandre Swift, we'll have to wait and see. Some people really like him. I'm just going to wait and see on him. And like I said, I think from day one in that offense, in that scheme, with that offensive line, with his style, with their recognition, I think it's finally going to align for Raheem Mostert this year. And with him being 10th in top 6 percentage with 0 starts, start the man, see what happens. Let's just start him a couple times, see what happens.
The lesson we've learned so far: Ben loves everybody, Steve and I hate everybody. Steve, let's see how we do on this next guy. Next up, we have a rookie. A rookie. God, I need to. Yeah, it's getting late already. A rookie in Cam Akers at the LA Rams, and Cam is being drafted as RB29 at the very end of the 5th round. So he's going just a few spots behind Raheem Mostert. He's being drafted behind Kareem Hunt, Deandre Swift, and ahead of Ronald Jones and Darius Geis. Right now, the Rams running backs have the 2nd worst strength of schedule for the position in the NFL, and they only have the 25th ranked offensive line. So again, not a great formula for success for the running backs in Los Angeles. His Foresight aggregate projection right now is RB29, right where he's being drafted. Total Foresight is a little more hesitant because he's a rookie. We haven't seen what he's done in the NFL, and Total Foresight has him ranked as RB34. So let's take a look at some of his notable college stats. In 2017, in 13 games, he had 4 starts, had 194 rushing attempts for over 1,000 yards, a 5.3 yards per carry average, 7 touchdowns. He also added 16 receptions and 116 yards in another score. In 2018, in 12 games and 10 starts, he had 161 attempts, 33 fewer attempts for 706 yards, a 4.4 yard per carry average, 6 touchdowns, and again added some nice complimentary receptions and another 2 scores through the air. In 2019, in 11 games, if you've noticed a trend, in 2017 he played in 13 games, 2018 he played in 12 games, last season played in 11 games.
All right, but he also went from 4 starts to 10 starts.
That's true. You're right. He started all 11 of those games. He finished with 231 attempts, a big-time jump now. And he finished with 1,144 yards and a 5.0 yards per carry average, 14 touchdowns, and then added 30, a career high so far, 30 receptions for 225 yards and 4 touchdowns through the air. According to PlayerProfiler.com, his best comparison is Marlon Mack. Yeah, it's kind of like, okay, everybody's looking for the next man up now in that Indy backfield, but that's fine. Marlon's certainly had his place in the fantasy game. He is Dane Brugler's rookie RB5 and says Akers would, quote, be a higher-ranked prospect with better vision or run compass, but he is a physically impressive athlete with the shifty moves and toughness to create yardage, projecting as a souped-up version of Duke Johnson in the NFL, close quote. Now, the nice thing is, he's at least on track to get more targets and more usage than Duke Johnson has, so that's a plus. The Rams' backfield is amongst the biggest question marks, I messed that up, Ben, heading into the season. It could pay off at RB29, but just understand it's probably a 50-50 chance at best, even if Akers turns out to be solid because of Sean McVay's commitment to using 10 running backs in LA this season. Which would be, you know what? Man. That is so fitting for a Duke Johnson comparison. A guy that's fantastic, hyper efficient, everybody loves him, and just never gets the ball enough.
See, and guys, all things go back to Raheem Mostert in that rotation in San Francisco. McVay saying just recently, like, hey, things will work itself out. I'm going to keep an open mind. I really like what they're doing there in San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan and that group of backs. So, which I do think is going to be applicable legitimately to this group. You do have Cam Akers, rookie running back, second-round pick. You have Darrell Henderson, who we'll get to here shortly, third-round pick. And then you have, like, I guess the veteran of these backs, Malcolm Brown's still there, and he's somebody who we'll have to take into consideration too. So, and we talk about these guys because Todd Gurley's not there anymore. And I bring Todd Gurley up because he was third in the NFL in red zone attempts last season, which is quite substantial when you think about the touches he's leaving behind and on the table for whoever gets that role, which, you know, if it's split up, we'll see how that goes. But it's interesting, guys, because I talked a little bit about Seattle and how that was a team that, you know, run heavy, but kind of switches it up in the red zone. Ironically enough, the Rams are quite the opposite. You're talking about a team that threw the ball at the 8th most frequency, but yet dialed it back in the red zone and was one of the heavier red zone rushing teams overall in the entire NFL. So very interesting when I was looking that over, and it's just very interesting talking about these running backs who, quite honestly, and I'm curious to see what you'll say, Ben, but I'm not really big on any of them. You look at that strength of schedule, you look at the line, and it's like, do I want to pay a 5th-round price to see if I get that lottery ticket? I don't know.
That's what I mean. We've seen Raheem Mostert. We know who he is. I know who he is. And I think it's going to be very easy for him to get at least 50 more carries next season. Easy. And what does he do with carries? He cashes in on them. So, you know, Cam Akers, he's in a similar situation with a much worse offensive line, with a much worse strength of schedule. Not a team that made it to the Super Bowl last year. They made it to the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. But we don't know who Cam Akers is. We don't know how much Darrell Henderson is going to be used or Malcolm Brown. We don't know. And I think, you know, even though, let's see, Raheem Mostert's going at the 503, Cam Akers going at the 511. I mean, if you had to pick one of those guys at those respective price tags right now, are any of you picking Cam Akers?
No, but I would say that right where he's
all in on Tevin Coleman.
Right.
I'm absolutely kidding.
You'll get your shot here in a sec.
I would say that right where he's going, I think is very appropriate. I probably like Deandre Swift just a touch better, but I would also take Cam Akers behind Ronald, or in front of Ronald Jones or Darius Geis. I would. I'm not a big believer in Ronald Jones, and I know he had a nice season.
Well, I mean, now that Shady McCoy's come to town, I mean,
and not only
forget
Shady
about
McCoy,
it.
but I mean, they've got a nice rookie there too. It just that's another.
That's what I'm saying. 3 running backs. You don't know what the usage is going to look like.
Yeah,
I mean, they don't love him, or they wouldn't have brought in Shady McCoy.
Right,
I mean, you don't bring in Shady McCoy unless you're going to use him.
Right, but getting back to
period.
Cam Akers, I mean, we know who Darrell Henderson is. We know who these guys are. Cam Akers, you think they drafted to come in and have a role. And you guys might think I'm absolutely crazy, but I just feel like guys who I've gotten excited about, this has happened to time and time again over the course of playing this game for as long as we have. But without a preseason, you've got a college running back coming in, a rookie running back who's not going to log any carries against any real competition in a preseason. If he's got a problem at all hanging onto this ball, he will be in the doghouse so fast in favor of a veteran who can come in and at least take care of the football. And that always concerns me until you get in that preseason game and you just hope like the young guy doesn't cough it up, because if he does, I mean, that can put him down the list very fast.
I don't know if I believe Sean McVay. I think they want somebody to win that job.
Right.
Sure. I don't know if we know who Darrell Henderson is yet.
All right.
Based on his limited usage.
Okay.
And some people think Malcolm Brown's the favorite to lead the bunch in carries. So, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen, but I do think the preference is going to be more of like a primarily 2-role offense than 3. Just because that's how it kind of was with Gurley last year. It's like Gurley was 1 role and then they had a rotation of the other
Why you hate? I don't understand why you hate Cam Akers in the Rams. It's just
I don't hate Cam Akers in the Rams, but I mean Kareem Hunt, I would take. He's going 2 spots ahead of him. I take more than him all day. I agree with you. I think you can pencil in Deandre Swift as long as he can stay healthy for more volume than Cam Akers. I'm taking Cam over Ronald Jones. And, I got to be honest, I don't know if I'm taking Cam or Darius Geis. I've heard some people say Darius Geis has said some of the worst luck injury-wise in NFL history, and it's not like some injury-prone thing, and like he's looked like a beast like we've covered in the NFC East. So I don't know, man. It's a big wait and see, and I'm just, again, for all of the hesitancy and the hemming and hawing I'm doing over here, when you compare that to a 5'11 price tag, it's a no way. No way.
All right.
Exactly.
So,
fair enough.
Moving on to somebody that I'm just unexcited about. San Francisco running back Tevin Coleman going as RB36 at the 7-12 behind Marlon Mack, in front of Jordan Howard, behind Keyshawn Vaughn, in front of Sony Michel. I'm sorry, in front of Keyshawn Vaughn and in front of Sony Michel. Like we said, 49ers, great offensive line. 49ers, very solid running back strength of schedule. The aggregate projection for Tevin Coleman is RB42, worse than his price tag. But Total Foresight likes him as RB32 a little bit better than his price tag. We kind of know who Tevin Coleman is. It's just a matter of how many games he can give you and how right he can be when he's on the field. In 2017, he was RB20 in points per game. 2018, he was RB29 in points per game. And last year, 2019, he was RB35 in points per game. He's going the wrong direction. He only missed 2 games due to injury. For some reason, they give this dude the ball inside the goal line, or at the goal line way too much. 6 rushing touchdowns that he vultured from Raheem Mostert. 20 receptions, 28 targets, 173 receiving yards. Again, worse yards per reception average than my guy Raheem Mostert with only 8.7 and 1 receiving touchdown. Another vulture from Raheem Mostert. In all seriousness, Tevin Coleman was 18th in runs greater than 20 yards last year. I did find that surprising. 14th in rush touchdowns, like we said. And
you sound so surprised about that. You sound very interested.
I'm surprised, but you can't count on him. Like, do you want to count on him? I know you. No,
I'm waiting for you to get to his best comparison.
Well. All right. Well, per Next Gen Stats, he faced 8+ defensive fronts more than anyone, probably because that was all at the goal line, inexplicably. And listen to this. PlayerProfiler.com. I just thought this was hilarious. His best comp is Jamal Charles.
No.
I love PlayerProfiler.com. You got to
wait. Is his best comp Jamal Charles like torn ACL Jamal Charles or like?
That's a good point. I recant Player Profiler. Touche, salesman. San Francisco, like we said, was number 2 in run plays per game, and Tevin Coleman was 21st in breakaway run rate. Player Profiler also lists Coleman, here's the problem, as their 21st most fragile player with the 30th highest probability of injury. Jordan Howard is the only running back in this bunch that I mentioned that I want anything to do with in 2020, period.
Keyshawn Vaughn.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely there with you, Benny. I know that even heading into last season, there was a little bit of that, like, well, Kyle Shanahan, Tevin Coleman, BFFs from back in their Atlanta days, and I think people wanted to read a lot into that and think that he'd probably be the guy that came out and actually got a lion's share of the work, and in some ways he did, but it didn't amount to anything right. You wanted to start with any reliability week to week in fantasy football. And to me, I know it's a low 7th round pick, but I feel like that's pretty much just throwing away a low 7th round pick, especially when you I'm dead serious. I mean, and like you said, Ben, when I look at that group of backs, I'll take Jordan Howard and the volume that he's going to get there in Miami at that point in time in the draft and on my team, as opposed to any of these other guys.
Tevin Coleman's had injury issues ever since his rookie season. He gets
worse every year as a result. I mean,
yeah. So,
don't
worry. It's going to get better as we continue on this list. Next up, we have Chase Edmonds, who is the next man up being drafted out of the running back spot in this division, and he is being drafted as RB46. Now we're dropping back to the 10th round, first pick of the 10th round. He's going behind.
I'll take Chase Edmonds over Tevin Coleman in the 10th all day, period.
Hey, it's all about value, my friend, right?
It is.
It's all about price.
If they're both there in the 10th, I'm still taking Chase Edmonds over Tevin Coleman.
All right, fair enough.
Period.
Okay, but he's going around some interesting guys. The two running backs being drafted in front of Chase Edmonds are Kerryon Johnson and Zach Moss. And the two going behind him is the guy we're going to cover next, and Darrell Henderson and Antonio Gibson, a guy we like on this podcast more than Darius Geis. Let's see. Yeah, we talked about it. The running backs for the Cardinals are about middle of the pack. And their offensive line isn't fantastic, 21st ranked out of 32 teams. Now, Chase's projection, his aggregate projection, is RB56, so a little bit behind where he's being drafted right now. Total Foresight actually likes him a tip behind that even at RB60. So, fantasy points per game, I mean, there's not a lot to love about this. In 2018, he was RB87 in points per game. Last year, he was RB55 in points per game. Actually, right around where his expectation is for this season. Last year, he did miss 3 games. He finished with 59 carries for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns with a nice 5.2 yards per carry average. He tacked on 12 catches on 21 targets for another 100 yards and a score. Good for him. He did finish 10th in yards per attempt and 18th in runs of greater than 20 yards. Again, nice. Kudos. Some upside. According to Player Profiler, he was 6th in true yards per carry. That's impressive. And 10th in production premium. He was also 4th in yards created per touch. All right, now that is a little bit more impressive. I'll give you that for a guy who is currently being drafted as RB46. But listen, this team runs a ton of plays. Kyler Murray helps open up rush lanes for all of his running backs. And if anything happens to Kenyon Drake, Chase Edmonds would have a legit RB1 upside, as he showed by going off in Week 7 last year. Get this, there were only 2 times the Cards gave him 10 or more touches in a given week last year. And in those 2 games, he tallied 236 total yards and 4 touchdowns. So he is a very nice high-end handcuff.
So you guys remember, last season, and I plan to do it again this season too, the weekly speculative stashes. And I was always really high on adding my running backs and my high-value handcuffs. And Edmonds is one of the guys, I was banging the table for quite a bit. And, the irony of all of that is you're absolutely right. When he had a chance to shine, he shined. And then he got injured, and we should thank him for his injury because, dude gets hurt, and the Cardinals are literally like, we have no running backs. Yes. And they went and traded for Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake gets off a plane and is suits up and plays Thursday Night Football against the Niners and tears up, and, the rest is history. So it's just kind of funny how all of that happened to work out. But, all kidding aside about that, I couldn't agree more. If Edmonds is healthy and he gets a shot in that role, he's proven that he can do it. So he's definitely a guy that, especially if you're someone who does feel like they are a little hesitant about Kenyon Drake, but you find him being your RB1 and you're a guy that you do take at the tail end of the first round, you're like, I just feel kind of good if later on in the draft I kind of secure that backfield. Just go ahead and grab yourself a little Chase Edmonds and stash him away, and just know no matter what, you have the starting running back in that Cardinals offense.
Absolutely, Steve. If he stays healthy this year, he's the number 2 on that offense. A guy that we talked about a few episodes ago, Boston Scott, comes to mind. Feel like he's going to have the Boston Scott role. He's going to have the number 2 running back role, defined number 2 role in an offense that runs a ton of plays per game, that utilizes the heck out of their running backs, and that has a good rushing outlook situation with the type of offense that Cliff Kingsbury runs and the quarterback that they have in Kyler Murray. So, and again, what did we say? The biggest question mark in Kenyon Drake this year is, can he carry the load? If the answer is no, Guess who benefits? Chase Edmonds. And, I mean, this is only his third year in the league. So we don't know exactly what Chase Edmonds is going to be, but I like that situation. I like that offense. I like that price tag, and I like his upside way more than Tevin Coleman. So, because that's the only thing that matters tonight. Moving on to the next running back in this episode, we have LA Rams running back Darrell Henderson. He's currently going as RB47, around the same spot as these other guys at the 1004, behind Zach Moss and Chase Edmonds, in front of Antonio Gibson and Boston Scott. Like we said, the Rams have the second to last ranked strength of schedule at the running back position, and not a great offensive line, ranked 25th. Darrell is currently aggregate projected RB45, a little bit better than an RB47 price tag. Total Foresight only likes him as RB77 because he was only RB95 in fantasy points per game. Now, the guy, he missed a couple of games. He only carried the ball 39 times, no touchdowns, 3.8 yards per carry. He caught 4 passes for 37 yards and no touchdowns. He was 24th in yards per reception, and his best comp, according to playerprofiler.com, is Maurice Jones-Drew. We'll see. Plain and simple, I think Boston Scott will have more weekly value. Antonio Gibson has a shot to be the guy and or a part-time slot receiver. Jay just covered what we've seen from Chase Edmonds, and Zach Moss could be this year's Josh Allen when it comes to Buffalo rushing touchdowns. Oh, and by the way, he hurt his ankle so bad again in week 16 that it required surgery. So he's also still rehabbing from that. I'm sorry. I'm just not at all excited about him in 2020.
Yeah, I don't think I have to spend a lot of time on this one, guys. I'm just going to go ahead and say, like I said, I don't want nothing to really do with that backfield. It'll be very interesting for fantasy purposes to see how it shakes out. I just don't want to have any vested interest in seeing how it shakes out. I want to watch from afar.
Ben, you said you're not at all excited about him in 2020. Were you at all excited about him in 2019?
If I recall, we talked about him having some upside potential because at the time, Kenyon Drake wasn't there. David Johnson was coming off an injury. So similar argument to what we said about Kenyon Drake's durability. If David Johnson, something that happens to him, he could all of a sudden be valuable. And again, in the lone 2 times where they trusted the man with 10 plus carries, it paid off for him big time. So I think with the way they have that running back depth chart now, with him being the clear number 2, I think it says that they believe in him. I think it says that he's fully healthy, and we'll see.
Who are we talking about?
Chase Edmonds.
No.
We're talking about Darrell Henderson, but I mean, I was going to chime in and say, yeah, it was like
I thought you asked me if I was excited about Chase Edmonds in 2019.
No,
you asked me if I was excited about.
You ended Darrell's comments with, "I'm not at all excited about him in 2020." That's why I said, were you excited about him in 2019?
No.
I was gonna say, there was possibly upside there with Todd Gurley's situation with his knee, but at the time, guys, if you recall, the price tag on Henderson was laughable heading into last season. I mean, I think people were taking him in like the 6th round, 5th round, and
similar to Cam Akers, huh?
Good.
Man. I mean, it's true, but it's not like Darrell Henderson did anything last season to warrant taking any carries away from Cam Akers, so I don't know. Okay, let's move on. We're going to finish this running back group off.
I'm cranky with all the crap fantasy players that we have to talk about tonight.
Oh, it's going to get better right now.
Yeah, I know.
This is almost like low-hanging fruit. I almost feel guilty talking about this guy, because there's nothing good. There's nothing good for me to say. Okay, the final drafted running back is Jerick McKinnon in this division. He is going as RB64 with the
second to last running back taken in drafts.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So look, we covered it. The running back position is strong for San Francisco. They run the ball a lot. They have a pretty darn good offensive line. God, here we go. Here's where we're going to start in. The problem is, let's go over Jerick McKinnon's last 3 seasons, shall we? 2017, he finished RB21 in points per game. 2018 and 2019, I'm going to make this quick, did not play. That's the problem. Okay, you guys want to hear a joke? I got a good one. I got a good one for you. Everybody,
it's true.
Everybody listening, if you're listening in your car, to a replay, if you're watching us on video, I've got a great joke for you. From playerprofiler.com. Jerick.
He must not have seen it yet.
Jerick McKinnon's best comparable is LaDainian Tomlinson.
Oh, I've never heard Steve Vegas sound like that in my life, and I've known him for a very long time. That's hilarious.
I did not see that.
Oh my god! I don't know if that means we should stop putting those comparables in.
It's funny because it's true, because that exists. That's why it's funny.
All right. Let's finish this guy up and get on the quarterbacks. We'll see if he can make it to game 1 this season. Kyle Shanahan once loved him some Jerick McKinnon when he brought him to San Francisco, and that's honestly kind of continued to be demonstrated simply by virtue of sticking with him through not 1, but 2 straight season-long absences. I'm certainly not going there, but if you want to, I won't blame you only because a website we respect listed his best comparison as LaDainian Tomlinson.
I mean, if I'm having like a 30-round best ball draft, maybe round 30.
30-round draft.
Maybe round 30 in best ball, just on the
But again,
the
there's probably better options at that point.
On his own team, like Jeffrey Wilson Jr., probably.
Yeah, I mean, anyways, I'm just, I don't know. I'm stunned.
All right,
I found it highly entertaining that his player comp was LT. So that
LT.
You know what? I'm in a better mood now. Thank you.
Maybe the greatest fantasy running back ever.
Oh yeah, that's what Kyle Shanahan honestly thought in 2018.
Is the best comparable to a guy who hasn't even been on the field for 3 seasons.
So we don't know. Maybe he is.
That's true. Maybe
he's
he
just
is.
like him.
Maybe I don't know. You're right.
Except LT never missed time ever, even when limbs were falling off. All right, so moving on to the quarterbacks in this division, actually a pretty interesting conversation, guy for guy, all 4 of them. And obviously, when you're talking about ADP, it starts off with the man, the myth, the legend, Seattle Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson, currently going as QB3 at the 507, behind Jay's guy Pat Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, and in front of Kyler Murray and Dak Prescott. The strength of schedule for the quarterback, for Russell Wilson in Seattle, is 7th out of 32. So pretty strong there. Unfortunately, he only has a 28th ranked offensive line. And he took, I believe, like 50 sacks last year. So we shall see, how much that impacts him. His aggregate projection is QB4, and Total Foresight totally agrees, has him as QB4 as well. Last 3 seasons, in 2017, he was QB2 in fantasy points per game. 2018, he dropped that back to QB10. And last year in 2019, he was QB7 in fantasy points per game. As per usual, he did not miss a start. Completion percentage over 66%. 3,877 passing yards at an 8.1 yards per attempt average, 29 touchdowns to just 5 interceptions. Added 67 rushing attempts for 313 rush yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. He was QB5 overall, 9th in consistency, 15th in QB1 percentage, and 20th in consistency weeks 10 to 16. He dropped off a little bit down the stretch. So that only earned him the 15th ranked quarterback in Foresight consistency. But I will say he had just 14. He was just 14th in pass attempts, but he was 6th in pass yards. And that's by virtue of being 8th in yards per attempt. He was also 3rd in pass touchdowns and 5th in touchdown to interception ratio. He was also 6th in touchdowns per pass attempt. And on top of that, he gives you that rushing floor. 5th in quarterback rushing attempts, 6th in quarterback rush yards, 7th in quarterback rush touchdowns. All 3 of those stats have a nice opportunity to go up this season. He was 4th per next gen stats in completion above expectation and 5th in passer rating. And at playerprofiler.com, they had him pegged for, you know what, I'm going to save that for Steve. He was 3rd in deep ball attempts, 4th in completed air yards, 2nd in money throws, 8th in red zone carries, 4th in true passer rating, 1st in clean pocket percentage. And, you know, they talk about injury probability in their like most fragile players at playerprofiler.com. Russell Wilson doesn't even have an injury profile that tells you how many injury reports they've been on, or he just doesn't have one. He just doesn't have one. You know why? Because he's been in the league since 2012, and in that time, he's never missed a single start, and he's never finished worse than QB 12 overall in his entire career. Listen, in single QB formats, the 5th round is still pretty high to take a quarterback for my liking, but man, who else from ADP QB3 on gives you the tried and true QB1 floor that Russ does, while also simultaneously giving you QB1 overall upside? The answer is no one. And if Seattle listens to him and lets him throw the ball more, look out, because all this guy needs is more volume, and that ceiling goes through the roof.
So yeah, guys. So when we were talking about Chris Carson a little earlier, you know, I had alluded to the fact that we all know, Seattle is a very run-heavy team, and last season they were only 27th in the league in the frequency in which they called pass plays. But interestingly enough, Russell Wilson with 89 red zone attempts was 2nd in the entire NFL, only behind Tom Brady, who had 91, so just 2 less. And Tom Brady, guys, he threw it over 600 times last season. So it just goes to show how much they turn their faith in the offense over to Russell Wilson in the money part of the field.
And real quick, to add to that point, Steve, then you add to that he was 8th in red zone carries as well, Russell Wilson.
Which is also just insane. And then, So, and I don't know if you guys have seen his video that's floating around out there, but Mr. Unlimited himself also.
Man, I was going to throw that in.
Also, made the most of those red zone opportunities, because he did lead the entire NFL with 25 red zone touchdowns to just a single interception. The only criticism I could have with him when it comes to his red zone numbers, he did actually complete a shade under 50% in that area of the field, which there was only a couple of guys that were worse in the NFL, but he only committed 1 turnover and still led the league in touchdown passes. So it's just one of those things where it's just like, I guess I don't really care as long as those are the numbers that you're putting up. So just thought that was really interesting, because like you said, Ben, if they can put the ball in his hands a little bit more, you could just, you could really see him with the opportunity to go off more on a consistent basis week to week than what we've seen a little bit in the past.
I technically, I believe it's Mr. Unlimited. If I'm saying that right.
Touche.
Yeah,
Russ got some new special videos out there on the social media.
Oh, yeah, it's fantastic.
Okay.
You should definitely check that one out.
Man, ever since he got paid, he's been just hilarious to watch on social media.
I feel like he's going to be a pro wrestler when his career is over.
I love Russ Wilson, man. Don't ever change, brother.
All right, I don't have too much to disagree with on Russell Wilson. He was a guy, just a season or two ago who we were saying really his offensive line is the only thing keeping him away from being QB1 overall in the NFL potentially. And really not much has changed. They haven't done a whole lot to address his offensive line, although somehow he was 1st in clean pocket percentage. So, look, he's got the ability.
That's because whenever he does see a clean pocket, he's like, oh, my God, this is easy.
Yeah, which is evident in all of his passing metrics. So the guy can sling the rock. He does give you that running floor. And yeah, with the quarterbacks going around him, like Ben said, the 5th round is a little bit higher than where I want to take a quarterback. But if you find yourself in that position, I certainly like him better than the guys going behind him. I can certainly trust that production and the fact that he's going to finish QB1 each and every year. Now, a guy who we don't know that about quite yet is a guy who's being very highly touted right now in the fantasy industry, and that is Kyler Murray, who is going as QB4 in drafts. Again, at the back end of the 5th round, he is going just behind Russell Wilson and ahead of Dak Prescott and Deshaun Watson. The Cardinals have the 19th ranked strength of schedule for quarterbacks this season and the 21st ranked offensive line. Right now, Kyler Murray's aggregate projection is QB 10. Total Foresight likes him as a much more reasonable QB 12.
And that's not disrespectful for a second-year quarterback.
Still a QB1 in fantasy. Like everybody just temper your expectations for the second year, man.
Yeah.
In his first year, he finished as QB 12 in points per game. He didn't miss a start, which was fantastic. His completion percentage was right around 65%. Now, his yards per attempt was 6.8 yards. He did throw 18 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. But also ran the ball 91 times for 544 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was QB7 overall. I'll give the man credit. He was 14th in consistency, 15th in consistency from weeks 10 to 16th, and 17th in Foresight consistency. So a little bit of a drop-off there in his consistency metrics during that freshman campaign. He was 10th in pass attempts, 22nd in completion percentage, 31st in yards per pass attempt, 23rd in passing touchdowns. He had the 14th most interceptions and was 24th in touchdown to interception ratio. He was also 37th in passing touchdowns per attempt. Now, to complement that, on the other side, he was 3rd in QB carries, 2nd in quarterback rushing yards, and 4th in quarterback rushing touchdowns. His best comparison, according to Player Profiler, a much more reasonable this time, Russell Wilson, if you will. A young Russell Wilson.
Still high praise.
Still high praise, yes, but, not LaDainian Tomlinson. He was 10th. I'll leave that to Steve-O. He was 9th in deep ball pass attempts, 3rd in money throws, 3rd in red zone carries, Steve. 6th in deep ball completions, but he was just 18th in accuracy and 25th in adjusted yards per attempt. Let's take a moment and reflect on his QB4 price tag. All right? Now, compare that to the fact that he trailed off in finishes down the stretch, finishing no better than QB18 over the last 4 weeks, coming off a Week 12 bye. Did teams figure him out? Maybe. Overall, he was just 31st in yards per attempt, 24th in touchdown to interception ratio, 37th in touchdowns per attempt, and he took 47 sacks. At QB4, you're drafting him at his absolute ceiling, and that's if he takes a step as an NFL passer and if he's able to stay healthy to sustain that rushing floor. It's a massive gamble and one that I'm just not willing to take.
Yeah, fellas, we've talked plenty about like a lot of our hesitancy when it comes to wanting to pay up for Kyler Murray. Like I feel like if things click and they go right and he takes major strides as a passer, maybe he can finish as QB4, but why are you paying for him at QB4 then? It doesn't make a lot of sense. When you just feel like the only way he could finish outside of that is lower than what you're paying. And, as far as the red zone numbers are concerned, guys, when I looked at, when I just even look at this division and I look at the pass attempts that we're going to go over them, Goff and Garoppolo have, when it comes to the touchdown production, superior compared to Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray, to me, his completion percentage of the red zone, average at best. For a guy who has 74 pass attempts in the red zone to only produce 12 touchdowns, which, by the way, ranks 23rd in the NFL in that category, that to me is, that speaks to a rookie passer that struggled as a passer at times last year. And that's exactly what happened. And he just has a long way to go before I could ever consider drafting him. And I know he's got the rushing floor.
Okay.
I get it. But I just can't do it.
I'm glad you bring that up, Steve. All right, I'm going to read something to you guys from our guy, Mike Clay, who put out an article within the last couple of days kind of stomping for Kyler Murray. He lists Kyler Murray as this season's Lamar Jackson. And here's the quote from his article. Over the past 2 seasons, we've seen both Patrick Mahomes and Jackson explode into league MVPs and the top scoring fantasy quarterback in their second NFL seasons. So the question is, who will follow in their footsteps in 2020? The good news is that it's not hard to identify the most likely candidate. 2019 first overall pick Murray, a man who, powered by a 93 for 544 and 4 touchdown rushing line, finished as fantasy's QB8 during an impressive rookie campaign and added DeAndre Hopkins to his arsenal during the offseason. The bad news is that unlike Jackson and Mahomes, Murray will cost you a mid-round pick as opposed to the late-round lottery ticket cost of Mahomes and Jackson. Of course, Murray's upside is enormous, so he's worth the investment.
You know, what saved me from yelling at Mike Clay was him making the point that I was going to make. I'm glad he's not, tunnel vision to the fact that I believe in 2018, Pat Mahomes went undrafted, or at least definitely outside the top 12 drafted quarterbacks. Pretty sure the same was true for Lamar Jackson last season.
Like a low-end QB1.
Right? Neither one of those guys in their second year were you asked to pay a QB4 price tag. Neither one. And I just don't think, like, even in Lamar's rookie season, I got to go back and look at it. Was it 18 touchdowns to 10 interceptions bad? I don't think that it was. And I don't know. I mean, the biggest surprise for me was how he trailed off down the stretch. Coming off the bye in week 12, he was just bad the last 4 weeks of the season. Just bad. Best week was QB 18. And I think he had 1 week where it was even like QB 27. So, you expect a rookie to figure it out more as the year goes on, especially when you give him a bye week. So I don't know if he had a rookie wall. I don't know if defenses figured him out. I don't know what happened, but I don't know who wasn't paying attention to the last 4 weeks of his season that all of a sudden is projecting him at QB4. I get DeAndre Hopkins is coming to town. I understand Christian Kirk might take a step. I love Larry Legend Fitzgerald. He's still going to be a valuable asset there. But QB4, if everything goes right, he might not hit QB4. And that's where you're starting the price tag conversation? No way. No way.
And that's where it's so important to not just look at like the whole season from last year and just calculate that as one total thing that matters. It's like, okay, I get it. He had a pretty solid overall finish for the season in fantasy last year. But you said it, Ben. He's just he's bad. A struggling rookie quarterback, bad the last quarter of last season. So you have to take that in consideration. But it's like people have just completely turned a blind eye to that. They're like, oh, they got Hopkins now. Oh, his second year, he's going to break out. Yeah, and I can't wrap my head around it. I root for the kid. He's exciting, and I'm looking forward to watching him play. I don't have anything against him. I can't do it.
Right. Thank you for saying that, Steve. I was going to say the same thing. I like Kyler Murray. I really enjoyed watching him play last year. I really enjoy watching that Cardinals offense as a whole. And I'm going to enjoy watching it this year, too, to see how DeAndre Hopkins factors into things. But, again, like, I would love Kyler Murray if I could get him as like QB 11 or QB 12.
You mean between where his aggregate projection, his Foresight projection is?
Exactly. And then sign me up, man. Then I will roll the dice on that.
That's it.
But at QB4, you're not rolling the dice. You're taking out a loan. And you're hoping that you get enough money to pay it back.
Amen. That's what was most frustrating with me with Mike Clay. And we love Mike Clay on this show. Love him to death. But to be asked to be paying a QB4 price tag and to say that that's still worth it because of his tremendous upside, the quarterbacks going in front of him are Pat Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and Russell Wilson. Who is he passing? Where is the upside with that pick? Right? Yeah. And then the guys going behind him are Dak and Deshaun, two other guys who have been prolific scorers. So where he finishes in that group, I don't know. He should finish somewhere in that mix, but I don't know. So, like, dude, I don't know.
You're taking the biggest leap on Kyler Murray of that group, and it's an astronomical leap in comparison to every other quarterback of those four on the list.
All right. That was a fun combo.
Yes, it was. And I'm going to say, I think this one's going to be a fun conversation because I think I might be alone in this one because I spent the most time on Jared Goff. And I came away feeling a little bit encouraged, and we'll get to that in a little bit. We are talking about LA Rams quarterback Jared Goff going as QB 19 almost for free at the 1304 behind our guy Baker May and behind rookie quarterback Joe Burrow, in front of Jimmy G and Ryan Tannehill. The Rams have the 15th ranked strength of schedule at the quarterback position, and like we've already talked about, 25th ranked, not very good offensive line. Now, both the projection and the total foresight already illustrate a little bit of value. So the pendulum tends to swing a little bit too far both ways in fantasy football for better or worse. And I think it's done that again because his projection is QB 19. Total foresight likes him as QB 17. You compare that both to a QB 19 price tag. And remember, last year, yes, he was QB 22 in fantasy points per game, but each of the last two prior seasons, he was QB 12 and QB 10 in fantasy points per game. A back-end QB 1, 2 out of the last 3 years, so don't overreact to what happened last season. Once again, he didn't miss a start. His accuracy was a tick under 63%. He had 581 pass attempts, which he converted into over 4,300 pass yards. Middle of the road, 7.5 yards per attempt. And, man, like Kyler Murray, even worse, 19 touchdowns but 16 interceptions. He did add 2 rushing touchdowns to the mix, and he finished his QB 15 overall in what we all agree was his worst season since his rookie season, and he still finished 4 spots ahead overall of where he's being drafted. Now, he was 22nd in fantasy points per game. He was 17th in consistency, and he was 14th in foresight consistency, despite being 3rd in pass attempts and 4th in pass yards. That's likely explained by his 26th ranked completion percentage, his 17th ranked yards per attempt. He was 19th in pass touchdowns, 35th in touchdown to interception ratio, gross, and even worse, 41st in touchdowns per pass attempt.
Wait, I thought you said that you got to something that told you how much you love
We will get there. Okay. I'm telling you the whole story. It's got to get dark before it gets light. I got to come save the day. All right. And you know what? I'm sorry. Because Jay challenged me, I got to steal a little bit of your thunder, Steve. Playerprofiler.com. He was 10th in red zone attempts. Not a great conversion rate, but he was 10th in the attempts. So hopefully the average comes back, gets positive regression this year. He was 6th in completed air yards and 11th in red zone carries and 8th in red zone completion percentage. But he was 7th in interceptable passes and 3rd in danger plays. Plain and simple, he struggled mightily at times last year. But here's what I think. I think Goff is a system guy, not somebody who's necessarily capable of imposing his will week in and week out. And that's fine. That's just who he's been in the NFL. But you can still use that as a back-end QB1 when things go well. And Sean McVay is an adaptable, innovative coach that has adjusted his offense just to better suit Goff. So check this out. The Rams had a bye in week 9 in 2019, and that's when they made the transition to 12 personnel / 2 tight end base offense. In Goff's first 3 weeks in that new offense from weeks 10 to 12, he struggled hardcore. But in the next 4 weeks after that consecutively, he was the 8th most consistent quarterback in fantasy when it mattered the most last season, weeks 13 to 16. And in those 4 weeks, so something may have clicked that can carry over into 2020. And that's what I find encouraging, is how well, once they changed offenses, 4 out of 7 times straight up, he balled. And, in the first 3 weeks, while he was still picking it up, he struggled. He trended, unlike Kyler Murray, in the very much right direction from weeks 13 through 16 last season. So, you compare it to the price tag. And, give me Jared Goff at QB 19 versus Kyler Murray as QB 4 all day. And I don't care how crazy that sounds.
So, earlier I mentioned how the Rams were kind of like the inverted Seahawks in a way that, you had Jared Goff on the season last year tied Jameis Winston for like the lead in pass attempts. So you would think that he would come in higher than 10th in red zone attempts. So I thought that was interesting. It's almost like, Sean McVay is protecting him a little bit, not putting the ball in his hands as much down around in that money area of the field. What is interesting, though, is like you alluded to it, Benny, he did have a solid completion rate, 8th in the NFL, but he also tied for 5th in the NFL in touchdown passes down in that area of the field. Didn't throw a single interception. So what that says to me is, McVay is protecting him, but he's also putting him in positions to succeed. And I think that's encouraging. And when you look at him from a season-long standpoint, when you talked about it, where he has, during the fantasy season, 19, touchdowns. When you look at it from the perspective of him having, I think it came out to 16 of those in the red zone. There's only 3 touchdown passes that came outside of the red zone, and usually it is that's a higher number. That to me is kind of an outlier. So you would think that will trend the other way next season, which is also kind of an encouraging thing for Goff. And like you said, man, at the price tag, there's going to be weeks where, to me, he's like a perfect if you're into doing the whole platooning quarterback thing. Yeah. There's going to be weeks where he just seems to feast. That whole offense feasts when they have bad defenses to play against. And we all know, you don't march Jared Goff out there against like the 49ers. You just don't do it. So you can pick your shots. And when the guy's free, it's kind of like, why not? I'd rather have a cheap, doesn't cost me a thing platoon almost that I can call my shots each week, then again, pay up for that. It just goes back to Kyler Murray and that QB4 price tag. But QB4, yeah, I just, like you said, Ben, I completely agree.
Well, I got to say, especially if you're in a super flex or 2-quarterback league, I think what Ben has illustrated, what Steve has illustrated, maybe makes you feel better about maybe having Jared Goff as a bench quarterback or your second quarterback in that league. It's certainly encouraging, and honestly, man, that is surprising information that I wish more stuff was like that out there and more readily available. The fact that, they changed offenses when they did, that he struggled the first few weeks in that new style of offense in 12 personnel, and then the last 3 or 4 weeks, he really balled out and found his groove. And so heading into this season, you would think that they're in great position to continue clicking and moving that thing along. It's his price tag is certainly very fair. He's next to free. It's fantastic in that regard. I think it's incredibly interesting too that he had 16 interceptions, none in the red zone, and had 16 touchdowns in the red zone. Or what was his red? How many touchdowns did you say he had in the red zone, Steve?
16.
16 in the fantasy season, yeah.
Okay, and that was passing and rushing.
No, just through the air.
He had 3 touchdowns and 16 picks outside of the red zone. And in the red zone, he had 16 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions. That's like eye-opening. Like, that's an amazing stat right there.
And he struggled at times, and they were changing up their identity.
That's crazy,
so it's not often where a team totally changes its offensive philosophy. Like, sometimes they'll adapt from one week to the other, but they went from a team that was pretty heavy 11 personnel to a team that converted strictly to the 12 personnel. Like, you don't see that very often, and it made so much more sense to me when I saw the pattern. When I saw, we know what they did. They made a massive overhaul. Usually teams offensive installations happen so early in the offseason, and it's such a big deal. And for you to totally pivot in 1 week it's
for a genius
understated how difficult.
For a genius like McVay, that's not a big deal. But,
you're right. If he could throw the football, that'd be great. But Jared Goff's the one who's got to go do it. It took him 3 weeks to catch up with the genius, and once he did, he was A-okay.
All right, let's wrap this up with our final quarterback being selected in drafts from this division, and that is Jimmy Garoppolo, going as QB 20 in drafts, behind Jared Goff and Joe Burrow, and in front of Ryan Tannehill and Kirk Cousins. And a very interesting spot. The Niners have the 14th ranked strength of schedule for the quarterback position and the 8th ranked offensive line. Right now, Jimmy G's aggregate projection is QB 21, pretty close to where he's going in drafts. And Total Foresight actually likes him as QB 14 right now, so a tick better than his price tag in his aggregate projection. His fantasy points per game so far in his career: in 2017, he finished as QB 21. 2018, QB 21. 2019, hey, not QB 21, QB 19. So, he did improve a little bit. He did not miss a start last season. You like that? A little bit, 2 spots.
Improvement?
Improvement? Question mark? His completion percentage last year was a decent 68.5%. He did throw the ball for almost 3,700 yards for an 8.1 yards per attempt average. And he did have 27 touchdowns and 13 interceptions, which is exactly what I would expect for a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo, honestly. He did add, a little bit of groundwork and a score on the ground as well. Some notable stats from last season: he was QB 14 overall. He was 19th in fantasy points per game, 22nd in consistency, and 18th in consistency weeks 10 to 16. He was 21st in foresight consistency. He was tied for 20th in QB1 percentage. He was 22nd in touchdown to interception ratio, not great there, yet 7th in touchdowns per attempt. So when you don't throw the ball that much, that's great. The problem is he was, like I said, 19th in pass attempts. Some next-gen stats for him that were notable: he was 9th in completion percentage above expectation. I don't know if maybe that's just because the expectations were very low that he was going to complete the passes he was throwing. He was also 8th in passer rating. All right, let's move on to some player profiler information. He was, Steve, I'll save that for you. He was 11th in true passer rating, 3rd in true completion percentage. He was 1st in deep ball percentage. Wait, he was 1st in deep ball completion percentage? Now,
that's correct.
Now, time out. We all know what the score was with 6 minutes left in the Super Bowl, right? When he threw a deep ball and missed by about 10 yards to sew up the Okay, but he was
the regular season, the Super Bowl.
Okay, but he was the most accurate. Fine. He was 2nd in pressured completion percentage. 7th.
I mean, the man threw 69% completion percentage. Are you really that surprised that he was number 1 in deep ball percentage? Jay, it was probably 2 out of 3. Like, they only probably threw the ball downfield 3 times.
Right. We need to have a minimum attempt qualifier on that from now on. All right.
My bad.
Okay. He was 2nd in pressured completion percentage. All right, that's impressive. I'll give him that. He was 7th in clean pocket completion percentage, 9th in adjusted yards per attempt, and 10th in accuracy rating, and also 2nd in drops. I got to give that to him too. All right, so there is something there. And I'll be honest, I'm annoyed. I am annoyed right now that Ben gave me all these stats for Jimmy G because it's simple. He's a ho-hum option in a 2-quarterback league. In single quarterback formats, he may be streamer worthy 3 or 4 times, not in the Super Bowl. Otherwise, get out of here.
Are you talking about a guy that threw one more touchdown pass than Patrick Mahomes in the regular season?
Oh, get that!
But lost to him in the Super Bowl, so
Yeah, he got the last laugh, and he got paid.
Exactly, but I couldn't resist.
And he bought a baseball team.
Just throwing that in there. But yeah, I mean, it's funny for a team that ran the ball so much last year, like the 49ers did. I mean, really, only the Baltimore Ravens were running the ball at a more frequent clip than the 49ers. It is a little puzzling that Jimmy G did come in 7th in red zone attempts. So to me, that's it's a little bit of an outlier sort of a stat. But I don't even really want to take a lot of time getting into Jimmy G's red zone numbers. I mean, all in all, guys, he was definitely above average across the board. He did what was asked of him, precisely what he pretty much did all of last season, and what I think he's going to be as an NFL, quarterback in the foreseeable future. And yeah, Jay, like you said, he's somebody that, there's going to be those matchups here and there where if you need to go, you're playing that quarterback streamer game, you go pick him up and you can plug and play him when you need to. But he's certainly not a guy you roll out week in and week out, not when he could be totally phased out of a game at any given time because, the 49ers might only let him throw the ball 22 times
Steve,
a week.
How dare you? How dare you? First of all, Pat Mahomes, half a Billy, is so wound around his head that he can't even hear you right now. So,
how do I dare not?
He's just swimming in a pool of ketchup somewhere.
No, exactly. But, dude, I'm looking at these stats thinking, why in the world don't the Rams adopt the Niners offense? Run the ball between the 20s and then let Jared Goff work his 16 touchdown and no pick magic in the red zone. My goodness. But getting back to Jimmy G, yeah, man. I mean, whatever.
Well, here's the thing for Jimmy G. Number one, it's fair to say that the man was second in drops. Number two, it's fair to say that his biggest receiving weapon is a tight end.
Sure.
All right. He went, 8.1 yards per attempt and 69% completion, 27 pass touchdowns. Like, it's pretty good. And what Steve didn't tell you, he was also 11th in red zone carries. Jimmy G was.
Well, and 11th. I don't want to excuse it away, but they did have a lot of health issues on that offense last year, and they've had some durability issues all over the place.
That's what I'm saying. I have come to accept that I believe that Jimmy G could be a back-end QB1 if he had better weapons and they threw the ball a little bit more than 454 times.
That offense is a big... But are you taking him over Joe Burrow, Jared Goff, Ryan Tannehill,
No, because
of
what
Cousins?
I just said.
Yeah,
No, because of what I just said.
Right.
Because I think if he were given more opportunity, and I think if they had just one legitimate wide receiver in that offense, then maybe the guy would throw instead of 3,700 yards for 4,000 yards. Maybe instead of 27 touchdowns, it would be like 31 or 30. I'm serious. And he was QB 14 overall last season, and he's going as QB 20 this year because we have a very short memory, except with Kyler Murray. So I did come away from this thinking that Jimmy G doesn't get as much respect as he probably deserves. And if he ever gets a true bona fide wide receiver one, I might think of him as a sneaky play going around for free as QB 20 at that point.
But that's not this season.
No, and it's not this season, and I'm passing on him, and I love Ryan Tannehill. I think it's stupid that he's going as QB 21, but I love it, and I'll take it all day. And I just talked about how I like Jared Goff, and I think Joe Burrow has way more upside than Jimmy G as well because that defense is terrible. Joe Burrow is apparently the man, and he's got a ton of offensive weapons. So, sorry, Jimmy. I respect your talent, but I'm not taking you in fantasy this year, and I know you don't care at all.
Well,
but our listeners do.
Yeah, let's hope for the listeners that our slate of players that we are going to cover in our next episode, the wide receivers and tight ends from this division, are a better group than this one. But hey, I got to say, I do feel like I learned some things. We got into it a couple times. It was a good episode, fellas.
And it was still an hour and a half. Every time I think it's going to be a quick episode. Never is.
Nope.
Just never is. Nope. Steve, it was great having you back, buddy. Anything you want to add before we get out of here?
No, not really. I'm not going to take Kyler Murray as QB4 this year.
Good. Hey, RVJ, are we recording Saturday morning this weekend?
RVJ is going to be RVing this weekend, so let's go for a Sunday evening episode, man.
All right. Then we will be back with you on Sunday evening. That's why I asked. Maybe now with that schedule change, with Steve along with us again, we'll see. Tune in next time to find out. We've got the wide receivers and the tight ends of the NFC West. Can't wait.
And that wraps up this episode of Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We thank you for joining us. Be sure to visit us, as always, at fantasyforesight.com. Use the links at the bottom of the page to find us across social media, including Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and wherever you pod. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next time.
When I said drafting Kyler Murray at the QB4 is like taking out a loan, and you better hope that the man gives you enough production to pay back your loan so you're not left in debt at the end of the year.
Yep, and end up having to get your knees broken.
Nobody wants that.
Yeah, no, I agree, Jay. I'd be highly frustrated if that were to happen. I mean, it's, as we all know, anything can happen, but the probability of that in my mind seems so small.
I just love how Mike Clay throw oh yeah, this guy's got as good of a chance. And let's in the middle, not at the beginning or the end prominently, but let's in the middle talk about how, oh, well, you're going to have to pay way more than you had to pay for Mahomes and Lamar, who both had MVP seasons. I'll throw it down right now. I don't know what the Vegas odds are. I'm betting on that dude. He will not be the league MVP this year.